The next interface we're going to talk about is the queue interface. Similar to the list interface, it extends the collection interface, so every queue is a collection as well. We use queues in situations where we want to process jobs based on the order we receive them. For example, think of the printer at your organization. Your printer receives various jobs, puts them in a queue, and processes them one by one in the order it received them. Here on the documentation, you can see that the queue interface has these sub-interfaces like blocking deck, blocking queue, deck, and transfer queue. Again, these are for special purposes, and chances are you're not going to use them for the most of your career. And here you can see various implementations of the queue interface. The two implementations you use most of the time are array deck and priority queue. Deck is short for double-ended queue. It's a special type of queue that has two ends, so items can enter the queue from either end. This is different from the queues that we have in real life. For example, when we go in a queue for a concert or a movie, we always enter the queue from the back. With double-ended queues or decks, items can enter from either end. Priority queue is another common implementation, and again, it's a special type of queue. It's a queue where each item gets a priority, and this priority determines the position of this item in the queue. So items with a higher priority move to the front of the queue. A common application of this is the queue that your operating system uses to manage the processes. Some processes have a higher priority, so they get more CPU time. So let's declare a variable of type queue of string. We call it queue and set it to a new array deck. Now, by the way, I didn't specify this generic type argument over here because this is redundant. The Java compiler can look at what we have on the left side and figure out that this is an array deck of strings. This is the reason why a string is grayed out, so we can remove it. Now, in this queue, let's add a few items. Let's imagine that C entered the queue first, followed by A, and then B. So our queue looks like this: B, A, and C. So C is at the front of the queue, okay? Now, we have another method for adding an item to a queue, and that is offer. So queue.offer. We can now offer D. So D will be at the end or the rear of the queue. Now, what is the difference between add and offer? The difference depends on the implementation of the queue that we are using. In case of an array deck, there is no difference, but in some implementations, the queue might have a limited size. In those cases, if the queue gets full, the add method throws an exception, whereas the offer method returns false. So it's kind of less aggressive. Now, let me delete this line. So our queue looks like this. Now we can get the item at the front of the queue by calling the peek method. So this will return the item at the front. We can print this. So at the front, we have C. So now we should see the C. Beautiful. We have another similar method that is element. The difference between peek and element is that peek returns null if the queue is empty, whereas element throws an exception. Let me show you. So I'm going to comment out these few lines. Now our queue is empty. So the element method throws an exception. In contrast, if we call the peek method, we'll get null. There you go. Now, let me bring this back. All right. Now, to remove the item at the front of the queue, we call the remove method. This will remove the item at the front and return it. So now, when we run this program, we get the C. And if we print the entire queue, you can see that the C is gone and our queue only has A and B. We have a similar method called poll. The difference is that poll returns null if the queue is empty, whereas remove throws an exception. So once again, let me show you. I'm going to comment out these few lines. So poll is going to return null. There you go. Whereas if we call the remove method, we get an exception. There you go. So this is how we can use queues. In the next video, we're going to talk about sets.